morning and good evening to everyone around the world. Welcome back to another episode of the Puck Drop Podcast, where we will be recapping week 13 of the NHL season. After only 1 week, I completely went against what I said last week of getting these episodes out on Monday. I wasn't able to record yesterday due to reasons I will not bore you with, but I am extremely glad that this happened and I was delayed by 1 day because of some incredible news that we got this morning in the hockey world. Not just one, but two breaking stories that we are going to get to on this episode. And even before the news broke out this morning, I already had a whole lot of notes written down because there is a lot to talk about this week. A whole lot of things happened in the hockey world, not just the NHL, but all around the world in hockey this week. So let's get right into it. Starting off a bit differently this week because I need to congratulate the United States Under-20 hockey team for winning the World Junior Championship. They came home with the gold medal after beating the host team Sweden in the final game. Sweden leaves with the silver medal, and Czechia with a wicked comeback against Finland in the bronze medal game, scoring 6 unanswered goals in the third period. Hell of a game to watch. Congratulations to Czechia for winning that bronze medal. But the big story is the United States and the dominant tournament that they had. They went undefeated throughout the entire tournament. They were the favorites coming in, and they did not disappoint. Just a dominant performance, like I mentioned, from all over their lineup, but especially the offense. They scored by far the most goals in the entire tournament, led by Anaheim Ducks prospect Cutter Gauthier. That's right. You heard me correctly. Turn up the volume if you didn't hear, because I'll say it again. Anaheim Ducks prospect Cutter Gauthier led the way for the Team USA. We're going to talk about that soon once we get to our NHL talk. Just a little sneak preview of something big that happened just this morning. Cutter Gauthier led the way, just had a wicked tournament with 2 goals and 10 assists for 12 points, a +9 rating. He, alongside dynamic defenseman Lane Hudson, were part of the tournament all-star team. The MVP of the tournament was Vancouver Canucks prospect Jonathan Lekarimäki. He, alongside fellow Swede Hugo Havelid, who was the goalkeeper of the tournament. I hope I'm saying these names properly. Respect to Gord Miller, who always seems to say all these international names very, very well. And D-man of the tournament was Axel Sandin Pellikka, the prospect of the Detroit Red Wings, who had a wicked tournament. Going into his draft year, he was one of the top D-men. It was him and David Reinbacher. David Reinbacher ended up pulling away closer to the draft and getting picked a good 5 picks before Sandin Pellikka. But this tournament, Sandin Pellikka really showed what he has. Just a great skating defenseman, can play both sides of the ice very well, can add offense to his team's power play, and can shut down. I know he's playing at the junior level, of course, not playing against the big NHL bodies just yet, but nonetheless, a great player that Stevie Y picked up for that team. The Yzer plan is no joke. But the Swedish team, despite losing in the finals to USA, has some big names. Like I just mentioned, they have the goalkeeper of the tournament, the defenseman of the tournament, and the MVP. Weirdly enough, Lekarimäki was not the forward of the tournament. He was just the MVP, despite being a forward. That honor went to Cutter Gauthier, as we just mentioned. Regardless, Sweden had a great tournament, and no doubt next year in Ottawa, they will be one of the favorites to win it all. I also should mention Jiri Kulich as that 6th member of the tournament all-star team. He is the Buffalo Sabres prospect, first-round pick from 2022, and a player for Czechia who also had a great tournament, 6 goals, 6 assists for 12 points, led that team to a bronze medal. Shortly after the tournament finished, they also announced that the 2026 World Juniors will be held in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. So we now have the host cities for the next year, which is Ottawa, like I mentioned, and the following year in Minnesota. Congratulations again to Team USA, a well-deserved gold medal. And now we can transition to the NHL. And let's start the way we usually do, looking at the NHL standings. And for once, we have a new face on top. The past 5-6 weeks have just been a carousel of New York Rangers, Boston Bruins, Vancouver Canucks, Vegas Golden Knights. Well, we got a new team on top, and they are from the Great White North. The Winnipeg Jets are leading the NHL with 56 points in 39 games, 1 point ahead of the Boston Bruins and the Vancouver Canucks. And the Colorado Avalanche, excuse me, they are all tied at 55 points. The Bruins with 39 games, the Canucks with 40 games, and the Colorado Avalanche with 41 games played. Mentioned last week that the Vegas Golden Knights are on a bit of a slump. They are 3-7 in their last 10, and they have now slipped to 8th place in the NHL. Florida Panthers continue to buzz with their 7th straight win. They have the longest winning streak currently in the NHL. But real quick, let's go back to the Winnipeg Jets, who have seemingly climbed the standings out of nowhere. Very quietly, they have made their way to the top. They are 10-0-2 in their last 12 games, and this is largely due to Connor Hellebuck, who is really making a push for that Vezina trophy. He's been playing outstanding. If you look at the Winnipeg Jets team stats, nothing really stands out for this team. They aren't really dominating on the power play or have incredible defensive metrics. In fact, they are 23rd in the league in power play and 26th in the league in penalty kill. So they don't have great special teams. But like I said, Connor Hellebuck is playing incredible. And just watching this team, they have production from all over the lineup. A guy I really like, Nikolai Ehlers. I've liked him for quite some time. Very fun player to watch. I'm not saying he's a top 10 player in the league, but he's good at a lot of things. He's a great skater. He's got the vision. He's got a great shot. I also really like his attitude. I think he's a really nice person from what I've seen in interviews. And I always go back to the playoffs when Jake Evans of the Montreal Canadiens was unconscious, knocked out, and there was a big scrum happening over him. Nikolai Ehlers kind of put his body in front of Jake Evans to, shield him so nobody falls on the unconscious player. That alone made me really respect this player. And he's a hell of a player. Definitely a top 6 guy. Could be a top 6 on any team in the NHL. He's got 14 goals and 17 assists for 31 points in 39 games, right behind the team leader, Mark Scheifele, who's got 40 points in 39 games. Josh Morrissey needs to be mentioned as well. He had a breakout year last year. The first half of the season last year, he was definitely one of the Norris Trophy favorites. Slowed down a bit, but either way, he's a huge part of this team. This year, he's got 30 points in 39 games, plays those big minutes, and is just a great hockey player. They're doing all this without their best goal scorer, Kyle Connor, who we mentioned earlier in the season, was leading the way for the Rocket Richard before he went down with injury. He has still not come back, and yet they're playing some incredible hockey. So credit to Rick Bowness and the rest of the coaching staff. They're doing a great job leading this team. Kevin Cheveldayoff, in my opinion, is the leader for the Jim Gregory Trophy for General Manager of the Year. If you take a look at what he had to do in the offseason, first off, with Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck, their expiring contracts, a lot of people thought they were on the move. They didn't necessarily seem extremely happy to play in Winnipeg, or, there weren't a lot of talks about them re-signing. However, he somehow made it work and re-signed both these guys to long-term deals, which completely changed the vibe of the Winnipeg Jets offseason. Some people thought they were going into a rebuild, myself included. But no, they kept their star player, their star goaltender, one of the best goaltenders in the league. And then all the talk around Pierre-Luc Dubois wanting out of Winnipeg. It's never easy when a player says they want to leave because it forces the GM's hand. Maybe his value goes down a bit. Well, he was able to make the incredible trade with the LA Kings that I did mention last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, and it's just worked out incredibly. Gabriel Velarde alone has already put up better numbers than Pierre-Luc Dubois this year, and then they also got Alex Iafallo, and Rasmus Kupari and a second-round pick. So a big haul for Pierre-Luc Dubois, and one that is really paying off for this team. So hats off to Cheveldayoff. He's done an incredible job as GM for that team, especially in this calendar year. He's definitely my lead for GM of the year, and I'd be surprised if somebody overtakes him at this point. Now, taking a look at the bottom of the standings, unfortunately, not too much has changed down here. We still have San Jose Sharks, Chicago Blackhawks, Anaheim Ducks, and the Ottawa Senators at the bottom of the list. The San Jose Sharks, we all knew very well at the start of the year that they had that atrocious start. They went their first 11 games 0-10-1, only picking up one point in their first 11 games. And then the next 18 games after that were somewhat respectable. They went 9-7-2, an over 500 record. But then unfortunately, their last 11 games, they are back to 0-11-0. Worse than their first 11 games, actually. They're on an 11-game losing streak. Not good. Again, expectations for this team were not high. They did have a bit of a stretch where they beat the Flyers for their first win of the season, and then right away beat the Edmonton Oilers, made that team, turn their season around. So the Edmonton Oilers should probably thank the Sharks at this point. But the Sharks, bottom of the barrel, they are by far the favorites for that first overall pick for Macklin Celebrini. I don't really see the Hawks or any other team, the Ducks, really catching them at this point in terms of the least amount of points. However, the Blackhawks have lost their best player for some time. We're going to get into that later. Very unfortunate thing that happened this week in the NHL. But anyway, for now, San Jose, they are the favorites for that first overall pick. The future, hopefully, is bright for that team, but it's going to take some time. Sharks fans are going to have to be patient. Now, let's move over to our player stats, where Kucherov still leads the way with points, but Nathan MacKinnon is closing that gap. He's only 1 point behind Kucherov. Kucherov's got 67 points in 40 games, who, by the way, is by far the dominant force of that Tampa Bay Lightning team. Without him, they would be in bad shape, which leads me to believe that he is definitely one of the favorites for the Hart Trophy. The Tampa Bay Lightning have scored 134 goals this season, and Kucherov's got 67 points. So he's almost involved in half of the team's goals. Definitely the driving force of that squad. But Nathan MacKinnon, like I mentioned, 1 point behind him. He's been on a heater as of late. He's got 46 points in the last 25 games. He's making a push for that Hart Trophy. Again, the voting can go either way. You could say Kucherov. Without Kucherov, the Tampa Bay Lightning would be nowhere, whereas the Colorado Avalanche have a lot of other stars, and they are near the top of the standings. So without MacKinnon, who knows, they'd probably be a borderline playoff team. Hard to say. Both these players can easily win the Hart Trophy at this point, but it's very, very nice to see MacKinnon making that big push for what's looking like a career season, as he's projected to beat his career high last year, which was 111 points. Good for him. He's been a top 3 player in the league for the last 4 or 5 years, in my opinion. Despite the regular season points, I've always said he's got one of the best skill sets in the league and such a competitor. Some other players who deserve a shout out. Bo Horvat is also having a career year out in New York. He's never been over a point per game in a season, and this year he is. He's got 25 points in his last 19 games for 39 points in 38 games. He's really benefiting from playing with a healthy Matt Barzal. It's good to see Matt Barzal playing healthy and playing like his old self. We mentioned a while ago, actually, in this podcast, that his best season was his rookie year. It was the only season where he put up a point per game. And this year, he's got 40 points in 38 games. So the Islanders are getting good production from their top guys, Barzal, Horvat. Brock Nelson's always a steady goal scorer. And then we got to mention Noah Dobson one more time. We mentioned him not too long ago. He's an incredible D-man that does not get talked about enough. A very young guy. He's got 22 points in his last 19 games. So some Islanders players red hot as of late. Mika Zibanejad, a player who's known for his offensive production, started the season quite slowly. I remember my friend who had him in fantasy almost dropped him because he was complaining about how little this guy's producing for how high he was drafted. In his first 16 games this year, he only had 2 goals and 8 assists. 10 points in 16 games, quite uncharacteristic of him, especially playing with Artemi Panarin on that top line in New York. However, his last 16 games, completely different. He's got 11 goals and 12 assists for 23 points, so he's really turning up his game. Patrick Kane over in Detroit. The first 3, 4, 5 games of his season, a lot of scrutiny there, wondering if he's just like he was last year in New York. He's done. He's not producing like he used to. Well, he seems to be shutting those haters up as he's playing some great hockey. He's almost at a point per game. He's got 14 points in his first 16 games of the season. Unfortunately, we cannot say the same for the Detroit Red Wings, who have been not so good as of late. They only had 2 wins in the month of December. However, new team, new year. They are now on a 3-game winning streak, so hopefully they can turn it around. That amazing start had them safely in a playoff spot. However, they have slipped out of that wild card spot. They're tied with New Jersey Devils at 44 points for that last wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference. However, the Devils have the tiebreaker with more games in hand. And last week I mentioned Sebastian Aho was my player of the week. Well, this week he did not slow down. Him and Andrei Svechnikov have the most points out of any duos in the entire NHL this week, combining for 30 points in 7 games. Aho has 16 points, Svechnikov has 14 points, more than any 2 line mates this week. So they are both playing some great hockey. Carolina, opposite of Detroit, started out quite slow. They are making their push back to where they were expected to be. A lot of teams had them at the top of the division. A lot of teams had them as President's Trophy contenders. Well, because of some tough goaltending, they have not been able to secure that top spot in the division, but like I mentioned, they are making a push. They went on a 5-game winning streak before their recent shootout loss to the St. Louis Blues. So, with 11 points in their last 6 games, they have secured second place in that Metropolitan Division. Now, taking a look at that Rocket Richard race, Austin Matthews still leading the way with 30 goals in 36 games, and a whole bunch of numbers coming out of Austin Matthews this past week. Last week I mentioned how he has better numbers than Ovechkin did at the start of his career. Well, through the first 514 games of their careers, Matthews has 328 goals, and Ovechkin had 318 goals. So yes, Matthews is on a better pace than Ovechkin, the Russian player who we are all watching as he may surpass Gretzky for the best goal scorer of all time. And only a few years behind him, Austin Matthews could also very well break that record. How crazy would it be for a record that's been standing for 30 plus years to be broken twice in a matter of, a decade? First Ovechkin breaking it and then Matthews breaking it. That would be some incredible stuff for this generation of hockey fans. Matthews has now reached his 8th 30-goal season of his career. Joe Mullen has 10, leading the way for U.S.-born players, so I think without a doubt Austin Matthews will be the leader in 30-goal seasons among U.S. players by the end of his career. It is also his fastest season to 30 goals, as he did it in 35 games, tying Connor McDavid's record, which he did last year, 30 goals in his first 35 games of the season, and the most consecutive 30-goal seasons to start a career. The leader is Alex Ovechkin, tied with Mike Gartner. They both started their careers 15 seasons straight with 30 goals. Austin Matthews, in his 8th season, has 8 consecutive 30-goal seasons. So that would be interesting to see if he can also break that record. That would be at least another 8 seasons of 30 goals consecutively to beat Ovechkin's record. That is if Ovechkin doesn't extend it himself this year. Leaf fans very fortunate to have watched this guy for the last 8 years, and they're going to be watching him a lot longer now that he's signed for another 5 years. Austin Matthews is going to keep breaking records, I'm sure. Very fun player to watch. One of the best goal scorers we have ever seen play the game of hockey. Right behind him, Sam Reinhart with 28 goals. We talked about him a couple weeks ago. Also, another quiet guy. Does not get talked about enough. One of the most underrated players in the league, and he is a UFA at the end of the season. So he's really going to earn a big ticket next year, whether it be in Florida or somewhere else. Zach Hyman of the Edmonton Oilers got a hat trick 2 days ago, getting him his 25th goal of the season. He's also been quite hot as of late with 7 points in his last 3 games, including 5 goals. He must love playing with Connor McDavid. It's funny, he went from playing with Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews to Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. We saw the smile on his face after his 3rd goal in that game, where he just looked at McDavid like, come on, how are you making it so easy for me? All he had to do was stand backdoor and put his stick down, and McDavid was able to find his stick for the hat-trick goal. And that hat-trick was probably the longest hat throwing I have ever seen. It just kept on going, and the people were cleaning the ice, picking up all the hats, and fans kept on throwing their hats. I don't know who was waiting. Why would you wait 10, 20, 30 seconds to throw your hat? You see the hat-trick goal, you see the hats start raining down on the ice, throw your hat. I don't know if they're doing it on purpose to just delay it and kind of make the Ottawa Senators more pissed off than they probably already were, but that was a little obnoxious by the Oilers fans. The Norris race continues between Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar. Quinn Hughes still leading the way in points with 50 points in 40 games. He also has an incredible league-leading plus 30 rating. Cale Makar, however, like we mentioned the past few weeks, does have the better point per game percentage, seeing as he's played 4 less games than Quinn Hughes. He's got 48 points in 36 games. As of now, the Norris Trophy is a toss-up. Both these players are well deserving of the award. If I were to lean one way, I'd probably give it to Cale Makar. You know what? It's too hard. Either one of these guys can win it. They both, even their time on ice is almost identical with 24 and a half minutes of game time. Both these guys deserve it so much. It's such a hard pick. You know what? I would lean Quinn Hughes, actually, seeing as he's the captain. Not to say that is any reason to give someone an award. It isn't at all. But he's the leader of the team, and, Cale Makar's already won. So I'd say Quinn Hughes. He also has more even strength points. So let's go with that. That's an important stat. 5-on-5 points. Quinn Hughes is better than Cale, or not better. He has more points than Cale Makar this season. So by the slightest margin of all time, right now, I'm leaning Quinn Hughes for the Norris Trophy, but it very well could change in the coming weeks. And finally, looking at rookie scoring, the same guy has been on top all season long. Connor Bedard with 33 points in 39 games. However, this runaway race might be a little more interesting now because of some very unfortunate news that we got this week. I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. But for the sake of consistency and organization on this podcast, let's save it for later because that is a later discussion. Let's get into this week in NHL history, as we always do at this point on the podcast. Patrick Stefan had one of the most infamous plays in NHL history. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was one of the best moments in hockey. It was very funny, very great if you're an Oilers fan. I'm sure a lot of people know the goal that I'm talking about, or the play, I should say, that I'm talking about. Patrick Stefan went in on an empty net to ice the game. His Dallas Stars were up by one. He had an empty net breakaway, could have shot it a second or 2 seconds earlier. Instead, I guess he wanted to skate it in. Well, at the last second, the puck made the weirdest, most improbable bounce over his stick. He was unable to put it in the empty net, and as he was falling down, he kind of threw the puck back to the Oilers defenseman, who launched it up the ice to Ryan Smith, put it over to Alex Hemsky, who scored the tying goal with just 2 seconds left. It was an incredible play, an incredible moment. Absolutely awful for Patrick Stefan, who already had quite a career in terms of, being drafted first overall ahead of the Sedins and not at all playing up to his potential, not at all playing nearly as well as the Sedins did in his career. The Dallas Stars, unfortunately, did end up winning that game. I say unfortunately because the story would have been so much better had the Oilers got the win. The Dallas Stars won in a shootout, so all is well. No worries, Patrick Stefan. Your team still got the 2 points, but a play that will be remembered in NHL history forever. That happened this week in 2007. Connor McDavid reached some milestones this week. He is the 5th fastest player in NHL history to reach 900 points. He also has recorded the 4th most assists through 600 career games, trailing only the Great One, Super Mario, and Bobby Orr. And he has the 3rd most multi-point games in NHL history through 600 games, behind only the Great One and Mario Lemieux. He recorded his 274th multi-point game. This week, McDavid is in some incredibly elite company. He is, in my opinion, the best hockey player to have ever played the game. Of course, I'm quite young. I didn't really get to watch Wayne Gretzky in his prime, or even Mario Lemieux that much in his prime. But to see what this guy can do on the ice, no one in history can ever do what he's done. I was talking to a friend of mine. He's not a big hockey guy, but he's big sports guy in general, basketball, football. And he made a good point. He thinks the greatest current player of any sport is the greatest player of all time. Because, of course, technology has improved, players are better, the skill of the game overall is a lot better, so it makes sense. You can't take away the accomplishments of guys like Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Howie Morenz, Gordie Howe, whatever. All these guys were incredible in their time. They were the best player in their time, but to make the greatest of all time debate is such a hard thing to do because the game has changed so much. But that said, with what my buddy told me and what I've already thought for years now, McDavid is the greatest player to have ever played the game of hockey. And apparently that means LeBron is the GOAT for basketball. But that's a whole other topic for a whole different podcast. One more crazy McDavid stat before we move on to a different topic. At least this one is crazy to me. McDavid has played 600 games, like we just mentioned. He is likely less than halfway through his career, and he has more career points than Corey Perry, Jonathan Taves, Peter Forsberg, Ilya Kovalchuk, Zach Parise, Eric Lindros, Ray Ferraro, Brad Marchand, Tony Amonte, and Brad Park. Some of these names, it just blows my mind to hear that stat. Some of these names are locks for the Hall of Fame. I would like to think that Jonathan Taves is going to be in the Hall of Fame just because of how many cups he won as captain of the Chicago Blackhawks during their dynasty. Names like Eric Lindros, Peter Forsberg, these guys are Hall of Fame players, and they had whole careers in the NHL, and McDavid already has more career points than these guys. That is such a crazy, crazy stat to solidify my point that this guy is insane. He's like none other that we've ever seen. Such a treat to watch. And although it's likely impossible that he's going to beat Wayne Gretzky's point record. I just want to see this guy keep going and break as many records as he can. Maybe single season record. That'd be incredible. 215 points in one season, or potentially 92 goals in one season. Those are two records Wayne Gretzky has. Both extremely hard to break, especially nowadays. But if anyone can do it, it's this guy. McJesus has no limits. Vasily Ponomarev of the Carolina Hurricanes scored his first NHL goal this week from a beautiful pass from Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who I miss dearly in Montreal. It was a beautiful first career goal as he one-timed it, perfect shot with a knee down. Congratulations to him on his first of many NHL goals. And another first goal this week, although it wasn't a first career goal, this one was special. It felt very good. Max Pacioretty, who's had some bad injuries over the last 2 years, finally scored his first goal for the Washington Capitals this week. He was quite emotional as you could hear him talk to his teammates in the dressing room after the game. Have a listen.
That was a rough 2 years for me, boys. And if I learned one thing, it's not to take things for granted. And that game proved we have a special group in here. And let's make sure we never take that feeling for granted.
Yep. Yeah. Max Pacioretty, who I mentioned, has battled through a ton of injuries in the past couple of years. He was traded to the Carolina Hurricanes from the Vegas Golden Knights in July of 2022, and just weeks into his tenure with Carolina, in the offseason during a workout, he tore his Achilles tendon, which required surgery, keeping him out until January 5th. He played his first game in Carolina on January 5th, but only a couple weeks later, actually 5 games later, he sustained a second Achilles tear on January 19th, needing surgery again, effectively ending his season. And then he signed in the offseason with the Washington Capitals, of course hoping that he would recover from his second Achilles surgery, and he finally did this week, coming back to play his first game and scoring that goal. Great story from Max Pacioretty, who's gone through a lot. He's had a really good career. He's a big guy with a lot of speed and a great shot. I'm very happy to see him back on the ice, and I hope the 35-year-old gets to play for at least a couple more seasons, because he's a lot of fun to watch, and he's a great guy on and off the ice. All right, now it's time for those 2 massive breaking news stories that came out just this morning from me. Let's start with the one that I hinted towards at the start of the episode when I was talking about the World Juniors. Philadelphia prospect, who is probably their top prospect, Cutter Gauthier, has been traded to the Anaheim Ducks in return for Jamie Drysdale and a second-round pick. Now, this came out of nowhere, at least for us fans, because we had no idea what was happening behind closed doors in Philadelphia. Apparently, Cutter Gauthier had told the Philadelphia management that he did not want to play in Philly. He did not want to be a Flyer anymore. Now, let's backtrack a bit and go over the timeline. Apparently, according to general manager Daniel Briere, after the draft where the Philadelphia Flyers selected Cutter Gauthier 5th overall, he said that he was made to be a Flyer, and he's very excited to play for the Philadelphia Flyers. And then, a year later, after the World Hockey Championships in the spring of last year, he came out and told management that he no longer wants to be a Flyer. He does not want to play for this organization. Now, why would a young guy just coming out of the World Juniors who hasn't played for the organization yet come out and say that he does not want to play for the Philadelphia Flyers? He did not give any specific reason, so it is still a bit of a mystery. However, we can speculate it's likely either due to maybe he doesn't like John Tortorella and the way he coaches, or maybe he was unhappy with the fact that he did not get a spot in the lineup this year and he was sent back to college for another year. Now, I know I just mentioned that he told the team last year that he wanted to be moved. However, it is very possible that the management of the team told him their intentions of keeping him down in the NCAA for another year for development, or maybe because they want to rebuild and keep, their team the way they have it, not add any pieces to the roster to, keep their wins to a minimum, even though that's not what's happening. Who knows? Whatever the reason might be. But if it is in the ballpark of not making the team and being upset about being sent down to the NCAA, I think would be a weird reason to be upset because it allowed him to go to the World Juniors and win a gold medal for his country, which is probably one of the greatest moments you can have as a young hockey player. Either way, I don't really understand why he chose to do this. I think the Flyers organization handled this incredibly well, We mentioned earlier in the episode that when a player comes out publicly and says that they demand a trade or they do not want to play for that team, it really forces the GM's hand. It lowers the player's value because all other GMs and all other teams know that they have to trade this guy because he's not going to wear the uniform. He's not going to dress up. So if their hand is forced and they have to make a trade, then they don't have to offer as much for this stud of a prospect. So for the Flyers to go out and get a young defenseman who is a very high draft pick and has great potential, along with a second round pick, I think is great return for this guy. Now, I will say, from what I've seen, I would say that Cutter Gautier's ceiling is higher than Jamie Drysdale's, but it's more of a risk-reward thing because we haven't seen Cutter Gauthier play at the NHL level yet. We have seen Jamie Drysdale almost a whole half season play, and he's solid. He's not the perfect player yet. He's not an elite player yet, but he's still incredibly young, and he's just going to keep getting better and keep learning. And now, playing under Torts, who knows? Torts has done a lot of great things with young players, with young defensemen. So I think it's a slam dunk for the Philadelphia Flyers, again, considering that their hand was forced. The Flyers in the past couple years have went out to acquire certain defensemen. A lot of them did not work out. Ryan Ellis was a big one. They paid a lot for him, and he never ended up playing a game because of very bad injuries. Rasmus Ristolainen, another one. I know he's still there and playing decent minutes, but he didn't pan out the way I assume the Flyers thought he would because he was an incredible defenseman in Buffalo, and now he's more of a bottom pairing D-man. Regardless, they needed that stud D-man in Jamie Drysdale, who's young and going to really shape into that spot. I'm sure he's going to fit in well with this new organization. If we take a look at the Ducks side of things, they now have an incredible prospect pool. They already had a bunch of young names that are just going to turn into superstars later in the career. Adding Cutter Gauthier to that adds even more offensive young talent. This team is going to be dangerous in years to come. Producer Randy did some deep digging and found out that Cutter Gauthier's dad actually played a few games in San Jose. So maybe there's something about California that this family loves. I'm very joking. I highly, highly doubt that had anything to do with it. I don't even think he requested to go to Anaheim. But I am very excited or very anxious to hear more things come out. I want to hear a reason why Cutter Gauthier suddenly changed his mind about Philadelphia. Nonetheless, I am very happy this story came out because that was the biggest trade of the year so far, both the NHL season and, of course, the calendar year, which just started. But we love seeing blockbuster trades like that. It makes the hockey world so exciting, so much fun to be a part of, and it might be a preface for how this trade deadline is going to go. We talked so much about teams needing goalies and a lot of rebuilding teams that have good goalies that might move them, like John Gibson, for example. So I hope this is just the start of a year full of trades before the deadline and in the offseason, because God, is it ever exciting. Now, moving on to the other biggest story of this week, which also happened just this morning. William Nylander of the Toronto Maple Leafs has officially signed an 8-year extension worth $92 million, carrying an 11.5 AAV cap hit. Wow. A huge contract for the Swedish player who we've been talking about a lot this season as he's having an incredible breakout year. There is so much to analyze with this contract. I'm going to have a couple of Leaf fans, Leaf avid watchers come on this podcast in a couple days. And I know I've said that several times before, but I've locked them in. They're going to come this week and talk about this contract among other things. But there is so much for us to discuss here really quick about this contract. First of all, the Toronto Maple Leafs. They've taken a lot of heat over the past couple of years for giving their top 4-5 guys a big chunk of their salary cap. Now, this is continuing clearly with this new contract. They now have 3 players making over $11 million, 4 players making over $10.5 million. Now, how are they going to make this sustainable? The good news for the Toronto Maple Leafs is the salary cap is officially going up. It's pretty much a guarantee. Gary Bettman said they're going to increase it by however much, but either way, that is going to help the Toronto Maple Leafs for sure. Actually, I might as well mention it is expected to go up $4 million by next season. The other good news is after next year, both John Tavares and Mitch Marner's contracts are going to be expired. So they will have that 20 plus million cap freed up. Now, I'm sure they might want to resign one of those two, maybe both of them. I don't know how they'd possibly do it. But either way, the massive contracts that they have with those two guys will be expired in 2 years from now. Now, next year, that is when Matthews and Nylander's contracts kick in. So next year they're going to be in big trouble because a lot of their depth are going to be expiring. Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, they're both UFAs this year. Same with TJ Brody, Mark Giordano. They're losing a lot of depth guys, so they're going to need to sign a lot of pieces to make up that roster. Timothy Liljegren, also an RFA at the end of this year. He's going to need a contract, and I'm sure it's going to be at least $4 or $5 million because he's played some solid hockey and he is a young, up and coming defenseman. He's only 24 years old. So next year is going to be a struggle for the Leafs. More good news for them, their goaltending tandem, I assume next year, is going to be quite cheap, with Joseph Woll and maybe someone like Martin Jones again or Dennis Hildeby. Either way, it's looking like their goaltenders are going to be quite cheap, so that helps them a lot next year as well. So maybe the Leafs aren't in as bad of a place as a lot of people say they are. It's going to be 1 year of struggling, and then they can really reassess their entire plan, their entire situation after the Tavares and Marner contracts are up. They can decide if they want to keep paying a lot of money for a top-heavy team, a lot of offensive talent, or if they want to build a more depth-full team or build from the back end, whatever. They're going to have a lot more to plan out in 2 years from now. So from an organizational standpoint, they must be very happy to lock in this stud of a player. Could they have gotten him for cheaper? I think so. Very hard to say. Who knows with the cap going up, what Nylander wanted. He could have got probably whatever he wanted elsewhere. But the thing that makes me wonder is a player like David Pastrnak, who signed just last year. It's not like he signed his contract a long time ago when the cap was a lot less. David Pastrnak signed his 8-year contract with the Boston Bruins for less than William Nylander's 11.5. And I think David Pastrnak is a much better player. Now, we talked about how Boston is able to do this so often, even years back with Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand's contract. These guys took pay cuts to stay in Boston so that there's more money to work around them so that they can build a cup contending team. Now, it doesn't seem like anyone in Toronto is doing that. Matthews' contract is massive. Again, hard to argue it. He's one of the best goal scorers of all time. William Nylander's contract is massive, bigger than David Pasternak's. Again, he's having an incredible year, and he can likely get that or around that elsewhere. So it's tough to argue. You could argue both sides of it. It's an expensive contract that's going to hurt the Toronto Maple Leafs, sure. It's going to hurt them build depth, but it also locks up a player that's really going to help them put up goals, and he's just a superstar guy that you want to have on your team. Can't really blame Tree Living for that. You can maybe blame Nylander for not taking a team-friendly deal, although a lot of people say that doesn't exist anymore in today's game. I just think that a player like David Pastrnak deserves more than Willie Nylander, so either Pastrnak got lowballed or Nylander refused to take less to stay in Toronto. Whatever it may be, the trade rumors that I said a couple weeks ago are clearly not going to happen. They are keeping this guy in Toronto, and who knows how the rest of this season is going to play out. Who knows how next season's going to play out and what the Leafs are going to look like down the road. All right, now moving on to some other news around the league this week. There's been a lot of heavy hitting and some unfortunate results. An injury that everyone was hoping wouldn't happen. Young sensation Connor Bedard has fractured his jaw and is expected to be out 4 to 6 weeks. In this week's game against New Jersey, Connor Bedard was weaving through the middle and he gets caught by defenseman Brendan Smith. I honestly think it could have been a lot worse. Bedard was seen for a split second with his head down as he was reaching for the puck that got away from him a little bit, and that's when the hit took place. Now, we'll say it was a clean hit. There's nothing that Brendan Smith did wrong. There was contact to the head, of course, but the initial contact you can see was to Connor Bedard's body, and it's just an unfortunate way that he was leaning over and that he got hit in the jaw and was subsequently injured on the play. Credit to Connor Bedard's teammates, and in particular Nick Foligno for standing up for him. Despite it being a clean hit, he sees his young teammate and their superstar go down, and he has to interject, and he jumps in and fights. Gotta love this out of Nick Foligno. Very similar to what he did when he played for Toronto and John Tavares got hit in that freak accident when he ran into Corey Perry's knee and seemed concussed and was out for the series. Nick Foligno jumped in and fought Corey Perry despite it being an accident. Well, same thing here. He stands up for his teammates. He does not have a C on his jersey, but he is clearly the leader on this squad. After Foligno fought Smith, things got even uglier in that game as the temperature rose highly with a bunch of big hits. Jack Hughes even throwing the body. It was a very scrappy game after all that. New Jersey Devils did come out on top with a 4-3 win. Connor Bedard, who was selected as the representative for the Charlotte Blackhawks for the All-Star game this year, he is the 16th 18-year-old to play in the All-Star game, or to make the All-Star game, I should say, and the youngest ever to play if he were healthy enough to play. He is out 4 to 6 weeks, like I mentioned, and the All-Star game is in 4 weeks from now. I doubt they would rush him back for that game, so my money's on him not playing. But if he were to play, it would be very cool to see such a young kid in the All-Star game, and very well deserved, of course. Now, with Bedard out, the question being asked, is the Calder Trophy race still a lock with Connor Bedard's name on top? He's going to be out sometime, and there may be some guys on his tail approaching for that trophy. Now, if you remember, when Connor McDavid was a rookie, he got hurt halfway through the season, and he was out for some time with his shoulder injury, and unfortunately, he did not win the Calder Trophy that year. It was Artemi Panarin who ended up winning McDavid's rookie year. Not that it matters too much, as McDavid went on to have an incredible career like we can see now. I will say, despite this injury, my money is still strongly on Connor Bedard to win the Calder Trophy, but for the sake of discussion, who are some names that would be right behind him or possibly take over the trophy? Guys like Adam Fantilli, who are right behind him in the scoring race and is having an incredible rookie season. Guys like Brock Faber, who we talked about a couple weeks ago, just came out of nowhere and took over top minutes for the Minnesota Wild as his captain and other top pairing D-men went down in Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin. So I definitely think he's in the conversation with the play that he's had in the past month or so. There is no question the hockey world hates to see Bedard get injured, but at least the Calder Trophy now has a bit more of an exciting race to it. Speaking of the Minnesota Wild, some more violence coming in their game against the Winnipeg Jets. Brendan Dillon, the defenseman of the Winnipeg Jets, was seen cross-checking Kaprizov in the lower back, right where the padding is missing, and it ended up injuring Kaprizov, who ended up leaving the game and not coming back. He is expected to be out a couple weeks with an upper body injury, and the Wild decided that they were going to get some revenge. After the opening draw of the next game between these two teams, Patrick Maroon fights Captain Adam Lowry, clearly a retaliation for what happened to Kaprizov in the prior game. But not only that, later in the game, a face-off between Ryan Hartman and Cole Perfetti. Poor Cole Perfetti, who had nothing to do with the injury on Kaprizov, gets high-sticked in the face by Ryan Hartman, and it was a clear, deliberate high stick. You can tell it was intentional, it wasn't by accident, and apparently on a hot mic, a lot of people have said this came out on Hot Mic, although I haven't been able to find it, neither has producer Randy apparently. But Cole Perfetti exposed Ryan Hartman after the game in an interview, saying that Ryan Hartman admitted right to him that it was intentional and that it was a retaliation for what happened to Kaprizov. Now, I really hate this kind of play. I think it's extremely dirty and unnecessary. I'm all for avenging your star player. It's a hockey. You got to stand up for your boys, but do it the way that Patrick Maroon did it. Drop the gloves, fight the guy involved in it, or fight a leader on the team. Send a message in any other way aside from high sticking a guy to the face. This is an incredibly stupid and dangerous play. If he sticks him a couple of inches to the left or to the right or wherever, he could have got Cole Perfetti in the eye, and there's been players in the past that have gone blind because of high sticks. That could have been a very dangerous play with an even worse outcome. So I hate the fact that Ryan Hartman thought that was the way to get revenge for what happened to Kaprizov. Ryan Hartman was fined after the game for this play. He was fined $4,427.08. Honestly, I have no idea how they come up with the number, first of all. And second of all, I'm very surprised that it was just a fine, not even the maximum fine. But it was just a fine, and he is a repeat offender. Ryan Hartman was already suspended 2 games earlier this year for tripping Alexander DeBrincat. So he did it again. He did something which I think is even worse. Like I said, it could have been way worse than it was. Thank God Cole Perfetti did not get seriously hurt from this. But I think that is a dirty, stupid play, and I don't like seeing it in our beautiful game. And unfortunately, we're not done there when we're talking about dirty plays. Nick Cousins, a guy who's making a name for himself this season. We talked about him a couple weeks earlier when he ran Gabranson from behind in Columbus. Well, he's at it again this week when the Panthers played the Arizona Coyotes. He hit a defenseless Valimaki who was already pretty much on his knees with his head against the boards. And Nick Cousins just targets his head and runs it into the boards. Now, it might sound worse the way I'm describing it. It was a bit slower than, full speed run into the boards, but you could clearly see he targeted Valimaki's head while his head was extremely low, an unnecessary hit, and then that started a domino effect of other things. Jason Zucker runs Nick Cousins from behind. He got suspended 3 games for that hit, and after that hit, Gustav Forsling jumps Jason Zucker and they scrap. But it all started with Nick Cousins' dirty hit on Valimaki. Now, later in the week after this game, Kevin Bieksa on the Sportsnet panel called out Nick Cousins, and it made rounds around the hockey world. I'm sure a lot of people have heard it. If you haven't, let's take a listen.
Now, what people don't want to watch and see is kneeing, hitting a guy's head into the boards, ramming a guy from behind, and that is a common theme for a player in this league, and I've never done this before, but I have to do it because this is a trend with this player, and he's done this a numerous amount of times, ramming a guy's head into the boards. The hit earlier in the year under Branson, this was Scheifele last year. Like, there's no place in the game for this, and what's the common theme in all these? Him at the bottom of the pile in a turtle position. Not like Brendan Smith standing up, taking your medicine. This has been a common theme for this player. And listen, I'm told he's a good guy. I'm told he's liked by his teammates. And he's actually a pretty good hockey player. But somebody in that organization or somebody that he respects has to sit down and say, enough of this. This doesn't help the Florida Panthers win. It doesn't make us a better team. Or the NHL has to come down and hammer this guy. My good friend Rafi Torres, love the guy. They didn't like some of the hits he was making. They hammered him with a 25-game suspension. They hammered him with a 41-game suspension, right? Somebody has to hammer this guy from the Department of Justice and put an end to these crappy hits because I hate them, and they remind me, like, that's a rat to me. I'm sorry, it is.
Kevin Bieksa clearly not happy with the hit that Nick Cousins threw this week, and I don't blame him at all. He makes a lot of good points. That's 3 now in the last year that he's done. That being Nick Cousins, of course, the hit on Branson that we mentioned, a bad hit last year against Mark Scheifele, and then this one now. And for this one, he didn't get any supplementary discipline at all. Of course, I just mentioned Jason Zucker got 3 games for running him from behind after his hit on Valimaki, but he didn't get anything, and it was a clear headshot. So I'm quite surprised by that call by the Department of Player Safety. And like BX mentioned, in all 3 situations, after another teammate stands up for their player that got hit, Nick Cousins seems to turtle or be at the bottom of the pile or not want anything to do with the player. Now, on this most recent play, he did undergo concussion protocol as he was shooken up quite badly from that Jason Zucker hit. But regardless, when you do these type of plays, when you play like a rat, as BX said, you need to answer the call, you need to answer the bell, and if you don't, that just makes it so much worse. So I hope Nick Cousins smartens up, changes his game a bit, because he's looking like one of the dirtier players in the league now. Now, this brings me to my next point of some inconsistent calls in the NHL. We've talked about this numerous times. We're probably going to talk about it almost every week. It's not an easy game to call. It's not an easy game to officiate. But a lot of these situations happen because the players feel like they have to police the game themselves because the refs aren't making the right calls. There was a match penalty this week in the Nashville game that I was a bit confused about. It was Nashville versus the Calgary Flames, and Philip Tomasino chases Dennis Gilbert, who's got the puck behind his goal line, about to clear it out, and he goes to lay a hit, a regular hit into the boards, and he kind of misses the hit, and Dennis Gilbert falls backwards and hits his head on the ice. He was out cold for a bit. It was a scary scene. And then Philip Tomasino was given a match penalty for slew footing. Now, when the players assessed a major penalty, the refs are able to review it, which they did, and they still gave him a match penalty. And that confused me a bit because it wasn't a clear slew foot that we see guys like Brad Marchand do or PK Subban back in the day. It was very accidental. Clearly, he did not mean to slew foot him and knock him out like that. He went for the hit. He didn't get his full body on body contact, missed the hit a tiny bit, and took out his legs, but it wasn't a clear trip or slew foot. So for them to review that play and give him a game misconduct, I didn't really agree with that play. Another one in the Montreal Canadiens game against the Buffalo Sabres. This one really bothered me. Mitchell Stevens and Peyton Krebs are both chasing a loose puck, or a puck that got swung around the boards behind the net. They're both chasing it side by side, and it honestly seems like Peyton Krebs initiates contact before, but Mitchell Stevens, being the bigger, stronger guy, knocks Peyton Krebs on his ass and gets an interference penalty. The contact was made before they both reached the puck, but you cannot say that Mitchell Stevens was the one to initiate contact or to throw the hit before they reached the puck. It was clearly a race to the puck, and they're both side by side, and I honestly think Peyton Krebs was the one to initiate body contact. Regardless, they're both equally chasing the puck, and the bigger guy knocked the smaller guy down and got a penalty for it. If you rewatch it, there's honestly nothing Mitchell Stevens can do to get out of the way unless he just lets Peyton Krebs get the puck first, but that's not how you play hockey. So I just think it was a terrible call in the play. Thankfully, it was just a minor, and I understand refs cannot review the minor play, but just in general, bad call. Now, let's quickly talk about some big highlights from this week before we wrap up the episode. We had our Winter Classic this year, and ours our first ever shutout in Winter Classic history as Joey Decord played an incredible game for the Seattle Kraken, helping them beat the Vegas Golden Knights by a score of 3-0. Now, the Kraken are making a push. They started out quite badly this season. They're on a 5-game winning streak, and that is largely due to Joey Decord's great play. Now, this goalie has bounced around quite a bit. He's been in the league for quite some time, but played his season high of 8 games for the Ottawa Senators a few years back, and he's finally found his place here in Seattle, similar to what Martin Jones did last year. Now, I know Martin Jones was a steady goaltender for quite some time in San Jose and in LA, but he's been a backup for quite a bit, and then last year he had a bit of a breakout, helping the Seattle Kraken make a push when Grubauer went down, and Joey Decord is doing a similar thing right now. He's playing great hockey as their new starting goalie since Grubauer is out with an injury. So good for him. And back to the Winter Classic game. It was a fairly exciting game. I will say the venue was very cool. I like seeing how Marshawn Lynch is so involved with the Seattle Kraken. That's great for that organization. He's a big part of Seattle sports, bringing them a Super Bowl a couple years back. One thing that I've always said to my buddies, the Winter Classic, very cool thing to do, but I personally would never want to go to a Winter Classic game. It's one thing watching the game outside in the freezing cold, but also the stands just seem so far away from the ice itself that you have such a tough view of watching the game. I've never been, so I can't really say. I have a buddy that did go a few years back to a Winter Classic game, and he said it was pretty miserable since it was freezing cold and exactly what I mentioned. The stands are far from the ice. They're not right up against the glass like you have in any NHL stadium. So it seems a bit strange to want to go to one of those games. I'm sure it's more about the experience, the things that happen outside of the hockey game, before and after they do, fun little things for the fans. That's great. I don't want to see this go away because I love watching it from the comfort of my couch. But I'm just saying, I would never want to go to that game. It sounds a bit rough. We had another Crosby Ovechkin showdown this week, and it was a great game with exactly what us fans hoped for. Both Alex Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby scored power play goals with a wicked goal by Sidney Crosby. It was probably the most typical Sidney Crosby goal we've seen. He does his signature knee down. He's actually kind of near the post behind the net waiting for the pass, and he puts his knee down before the pass even comes as a little backboard. Makes himself big in case for whatever reason he misses the puck. It'll just bounce off his leg and it'll be there for him to tap in. He ends up swinging at the puck, and it doesn't go in right away. And as he's falling on his ass, he's still batting it, and he hits it out of the air on his third swing and gets the puck in while he's on his ass. It was a wicked goal. Sidney Crosby, it just shows the determination. He does not give up on the play. Young kids watching the game, I sound like Don Cherry when I say this, but the young kids growing up watching hockey should definitely watch a player like Sidney Crosby because he just exemplifies what you need to be as a professional all over the ice. He's one of the best two-way forwards we've seen in this decade or in, my generation of hockey. He does everything right. He's never been the fastest skater. He's never had the best shot, maybe the best backhand shot in the league. Never the best hands, but he's just such a smart player. So good everywhere on the ice and at every little part of the game. Face-offs he's great at. All the things I mentioned before. I never said he's the best, but he's still solid. Great shot, great hands, great vision, great speed. Just such a good player, but it's his determination and his hockey IQ that really sets him above the rest and has made him such a successful hockey player. So go watch this guy if you haven't. I'm sure you have if you're listening to this podcast. He's an incredible talent, still at the age of 36. He's one of the best players in the league. I was talking earlier how McDavid's probably the best player I've ever seen in my life and the best player to ever play the game of hockey. Crosby's a close second in terms of the best player of my generation. He's done it all. He's won it all. Just an amazing hockey player to watch, and I'm so glad that he's continuing to produce the way he is now. Ultimately, it was a very close game between the Capitals and the Penguins. The Capitals went up 4-0, that fourth goal being that Alex Ovechkin power play goal. The Pittsburgh Penguins scored one at the end of the first, but it was called back due to offsides, and then they did score 3 goals later, but they came up too short, losing 4-3 in that game. Back over to Minnesota, Marc-Andre Fleury had a pretty incredible highlight. This guy seems to be all over the place, especially on this podcast. I talk about him every week. There was a play. It actually reminded me of the play that we talked about early when we talked about This Week in History, the Patrick Stephon play. Very similar. But instead of a massive screw up, we had a massive highlight. As the Wild were down 3-2 to the Columbus Blue Jackets, Fleury tried skating to the bench to get the extra attacker a few times, but he kept on having to backtrack as the Wild would lose possession. Well, on the third time, he almost makes it all the way to the bench when he sees the Columbus Blue Jackets breaking out. Danforth going up the side of the ice, Fleury rushing back to get in his net, and he makes a diving save. Danforth, who thought he had an empty net, gets robbed by Marc-Andre Fleury, and then the very next play, the Wild go up and score the game-tying goal. It really reminded me of that Patrick Stephon play, the way that the empty net was missed, or in this case, beautiful save, and then that same play goes up the other way. The puck goes down to the corner of the ice, kind of the boards. The Wild player popped it to the middle, just like Ryan Smith did with Ales Hemsky, and the player in the middle pulls it to the back end and scores a beautiful goal to tie the game late in the third period. The big difference with this game is that the Minnesota Wild went on to win in overtime. Marc-Andre Fleury made another incredible save in OT, allowing the Wild to go up the other way and win the game in OT. Was a beautiful save, a wonderful moment for Marc-Andre Fleury. This guy just, the smile on his face when he's playing, he loves hockey, if not as much, then more than anyone else in the league. He's still doing it at the age of 39. I really hope he plays another season next year, although it's looking unlikely. Regardless, we mentioned last week his numbers. He is one of the greats, second all-time in games played, third all-time in wins. An incredible career for Marc-Andre Fleury, and very glad to see another wicked highlight from him. Hopefully we see him in the postseason. Who knows what kind of magic he could put on as he walks into the sunset on a great career. Now, before we end our episode with our good, bad, and ugly segment, this pod is already running pretty long. We're at 55 minutes. I got to talk about the PWHL, the first professional women's hockey league in North America. Started off, had its inaugural game January 1st, and it was a success. This league is looking pretty interesting. They have their own few sets of rules. They took most of the NHL and IHF rules, but tweaked a couple of them. The first one, or the main one, being the point system. They went with the 3-2-1-0 point system, which honestly makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot more sense than the point system the NHL has because it values a regulation win more than the OT or shootout win. 3 points for a regulation win, 2 points for an overtime or shootout win, 1 point for the OT shootout loss, and 0 points for that regulation loss. So in total, a game is worth 3 points, whether one team takes all 3 points or both teams ended up splitting it in a 2-1 way. All the games are worth 3 points, which makes more sense than in today's NHL. A game that goes to overtime, there's an extra third point thrown in, which could hurt a lot of other teams that, they don't want to see teams in their division going to overtime too much because they keep getting added points even if they're losing those games. The 3-2-1 system makes way more sense. Now, do I want to see the NHL do that? I don't know. It's been years, my whole life. The NHL has had this point system. I'm a guy that doesn't embrace change too much. It would change a lot of things like records, teams that have the most points in a season. The Boston Bruins just beat the record last year. A lot of these things would become skewed. Of course, you could still track it with wins or wins per game, whatever it may be. That's not the only reason why I don't like it. Or not that I don't like it, but I wouldn't want the NHL to change just yet. It's more just I'm comfortable with the way they have it now. I'm used to it. Regardless, that's a good point system. I like that the PWHL is trying it out. It's what's been done in IHF. It's what's done in the World Juniors that just finished. So it's a great point system. Good for them for trying it out. Another difference in their rules is the shootout. Now, in the NHL, 3 shots. It's a best out of 3 shots, and no player can shoot twice until the entire roster has shot. In the IHF, it's best out of 5 shots, and after the 5th shot, any player can reshoot as many times as they want. In the PWHL, there's no limit to how many times a player can shoot whenever they want. So in that best of 5, the same player can shoot all 5 shots. They don't need 5 players and then they rotate through whoever they want. They can choose any player at any time to shoot any shot. Very interesting way to make that rule. That's something we have never seen before. I wonder how that's going to look. I'm not sure I like that one too much because, it'd always be star players shooting. That's like Connor McDavid shooting every shot or Patrick Kane shooting every shot in the shootout. You don't really get to see a variety of different players. But again, an interesting rule. Another one, which I quite like, is penalties. A penalty ends after the team scores a shorthanded goal. That one's an interesting one. A lot of people in media have been talking about that rule for a long time, a potential rule change in the NHL. Again, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but it's a very interesting one. And I especially wonder how teams are going to change their penalty kill strategy. Are teams going to be more aggressive, hoping to, kill off that penalty by scoring a goal? You know that old saying, the best defense is a good offense? Well, in this case, the best way to kill the penalty is with a good offense. Being aggressive instead of sitting back, actually try to go for a goal, catch the offensive team off guard and, get a breakaway and score, whatever it may be. It's going to change the way teams play defense and the way they kill their penalties. I think that's a very interesting one, and I'm looking forward to watching how that's going to change. I'm honestly going to watch a lot of these games because the rule changes are quite interesting, and the games we've had so far are quite physical. Very contrary to what women hockey has been in the past in the Olympics or NCAA women's hockey. Not much body contact. In fact, you're not allowed body checks in most women hockey leagues. In this PWHL league, you are allowed body checking. So it's a very interesting take on women's hockey, and from the games we've seen so far, they've been great. There's a lot of physicality, and it's good hockey. There was even 13,000 fans in the game in Minnesota, so it's great to see this league thriving in North America. I think if they work hand in hand with the NHL, both leagues can survive and grow very well. It's great for growing the game of hockey in North America and around the world. All right, now let's jump into our good, bad, and ugly segment for this week 13. Starting off with the good, I have a quite impressive stat that I came across this week, and it's related to the Lady Byng Award. Players that exemplify both skill but also sportsmanship and gentlemanly conduct on the ice. And a good way to track that is penalty minutes. Players that play a lot of minutes, a lot of hard hockey, but don't take a lot of penalties. That's not easy to do, and there's some players that have been doing that very well this season. Jake Neighbors of the St. Louis Blues has played 37 games and has 0 penalty minutes this season. Morgan Riley of the Toronto Maple Leafs, 30 games played, 0 penalty minutes. David Gustafsson of the Winnipeg Jets, 27 games, 0 penalty minutes. Matthew Phillips from the Washington Capitals, 26 games, 0 penalty minutes. James Hamblin of the Edmonton Oilers, 25 games, 0 penalty minutes. Nick Robertson of the Toronto Maple Leafs, 24 games, 0 penalty minutes. Kent Johnson of the Columbus Blue Jackets, 24 games, 0 penalty minutes. Noah Cates of the Philadelphia Flyers, 21 games, no penalty minutes. And Shea Theodore of the Vegas Golden Knights, 20 games and no penalty minutes. Very impressive from all these players, and it's even more impressive for the defensemen that play 20 plus minutes a game. Guys like Shea Theodore, guys like Morgan Riley, who have to, play rough hockey. They have to hit, they have to take the body, they have to tie guys up in front of the net, whatever it may be. To do all that and to do it well and not take any penalties is extremely impressive. So these guys get my good for week 13. And for my bad, similarly, I'm going to talk about some players, but some players who have been slumping as of late. Starting with Dylan Dubé of the Calgary Flames. Now, this guy, I saw him a couple years ago for the first time, hadn't really heard of him, and I saw him break out, and I watched him closely, and I really liked his game. For a smaller guy, he played quick, he played hard. I liked what I saw a lot, but he has 0 points in his last 20 games this season, which is a very, very bad run for this guy. Someone who should be a solid bottom six forward, and he's young. He should be working up that roster, especially for a team that hasn't been great. I really thought he'd make a push for, some top 6 minutes, but he really has been struggling this year. I hope he breaks out of that slump because that is an awful stat. Braden Shen, captain of the St. Louis Blues, has 0 points in his last 12 games. Now, he's an older veteran. He's not what he used to be, but for the captain and a guy still playing in the top six, to be getting 0 points in 12 games is a tough stretch. Anton Lundell, a young kid in Florida who had a great rookie season and a great sophomore season. He's got 0 points in his last 9 games. And finally, former superstar Johnny Gaudreau hasn't been himself ever since joining Columbus, and he's got 0 points in 4 games. I know it's not that long, but he's got a -4 rating, and for the guy who's supposed to be the guy in Columbus, 0 points in 4 games is not cutting it. He's got to do better. These 4 players are my bad for this week. And moving on to our ugly. This is by far my least favorite thing about sports, and it's no one's fault, but that is injuries. We talked about young phenom Connor Bedard getting injured this week. A lot of teams have it real bad. The Minnesota Wild iced a roster worth just $36.4 million, including 11 players making under $1 million this year due to injuries. They're missing guys like Jared Spurgeon, Kirill Kaprizov, Jonas Berdin, Matt Zuccarello, Philip Gustafsson, Marcus Foligno, and Vinci Lettieri. The New Jersey Devils are also missing a lot of players, including Jack Hughes, who was injured in that same game that Connor Bedard was injured, right in time for the next Hughes versus Hughes showdown as the New Jersey Devils face the Vancouver Canucks. Unfortunately, he will not be able to play in that game. The Devils are also missing Andre Palat, Thomas Nosek, Timo Meier, Jonas Siegenthaler, and Dougie Hamilton. Hamilton's going to be out until at least the end of March, probably the regular season, and that is a huge loss. Lucky for them, Simon Nemec, their second overall pick from 2 years ago, has stepped into that role and is playing some great hockey, but nonetheless, losing a guy like Dougie Hamilton is a major loss for that team. And two more players ruled out for the entire season. Phoenix Copley, goaltender for the LA Kings, sustained a knee injury on Saturday, and he is expected to miss the remainder of the season, as well as Christian Dvorak from the Montreal Canadiens suffered a pectoral injury on Friday, and he is also out for the remainder of the season. So this week's ugly is something that is pretty much out of everybody's control. It's just the most unfortunate part about sports. Players missing games. It's tough. Some players have, ended their careers short because of bad injuries. It's just a terrible thing, something that we wish we could take out of sports altogether. It would make the game that much better, but that's life and nothing we can do about it. All right, now let's close our episode off with our weekly trivia question. Now, last week's question was a good one. It was pretty challenging for a lot of people. I asked which player after Quinn Hughes had the most points in the 2023 calendar year. And to surprise most people, the answer is Vince Dunn. Vince Dunn of the Seattle Kraken had the second most points after Quinn Hughes in the 2023 calendar year, beating out guys like Cale Makar and Erik Karlsson, who put up crazy numbers last year because he's just been a consistent guy both last season and this season. Now, this week's trivia question. It's a simple one that I always go to. If you're a good friend of mine, you probably know the answer to this because I love asking it. Which player has the most shots on goal in NHL history? Simple as that. Check out the Instagram post. Make sure to comment your answer, and we will let you know the answer in a couple of days. And if you're right, bragging rights for your buddies and a potential prize coming your way from the Puck Drop family. Thank you all for listening. Make sure to tune in next week for our Week 14 recap. We'll see you then.